Boom, bada bing. Got a game against Nate Dogg, 94. What does Nate Dogg 94 do here? Does he go Queen B3? Boom. 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 Lots of moves. Boom. You can play this move too. Boom. So he goes boom. So we do the only move, and then we do the only move. Bishop G7, C. So yeah, now he has options. Bishop C4, knight E2, or you can go knight F3. Goes knight F3. Against that, we play C5. So I think against... I'll start thinking here a bit more, but... Bishop B2. It's, strange. Yeah, I feel like Queen A5 is just... should be the move. Bishop B2 is like pretty anti-theory. So is H3. This is all just, you know, some hogwash. It's really not that good. So I could just play normal ideas here. Rook D8 looks pretty good. Rook D8 or knight C6. Probably Rook D8. Just put more pressure on the pawn. Eventually play knight C6, E6. Should be equalized or worse for white. Not 100% sure about that, but should be somewhere around there. Equalized or worse. Listen to some
It is a
Julian.
well-known fact that the death of God, or at least the declaration of the death of God, is one of the defining characteristics of so-called post-metaphysical or modern philosophy. Whether it's the Nietzschean declaration of the death of God, whether it's the existentialist declaration of the burden of man who has to reinvent himself after the death of God, or whether it's the Lacanian quip that the existentialists may have declared the death of God but forgot to tell God, the death of God remains one of the most important ideas within the history of Western philosophy. Now in this video, I'm going to try to explain what Zizek identifies as precipitous identification, how this relates to the idea of the death of God, the Lacanian idea that there is no big other, the symbolic identification with the name of the Father, and why when we believe in something, we always believe on behalf of the other. That's what I'm going to try to cover here in about 10 minutes. Now, if you'd like to support this channel, and if you'd like to download my ebook introduction to Zizek titled And Yet It Moves, 5 Lessons on Zizek, please consider becoming a patron by going to www.patreon.com/Jeneline and Julian. Now, I actually want to start with a completely unexpected angle, which is Althusserian ideological interpolation. Althusserian ideological interpolation functions according to an example that Althusser himself uses. He says you could be walking on the street, and all of a sudden a policeman yells, "Hey, you there!" Now, It could be that this you there is not you. In fact, it's a general declarative statement. The policeman could be chasing someone else in the street. And yet, when you hear, hey, you there, and you turn around as if you were being summoned, we have here the elementary gesture of what Althusser calls interpolation. Namely, that you recognize yourself in the call of the other. And for Althusser, this happens across what he calls ideological state apparati. That whether it's today, for example,
I'm sure I lagged right there.
targeted through ad campaigns, whether it's being addressed by governmental organizations as to how to wear a mask, etc., that we're constantly being interpolated on behalf of a symbolic authority. And that crucially, we recognize ourselves in that call, that we identify through that missive. Now, what's key for Althusser, and this is slightly more technical, but I think easy to explain, is that this interpolation always has a retroactive effect. In other words, as soon as you are interpolated, it feels like the message was always already there just for you. It's like the famous poster where we have Uncle Sam saying, "I need you." As soon as you see the pointed finger at yourself, it seems to you as if in advance you had been somehow selected to be addressed by Uncle Sam. In other words, you find yourself in the subjective gaze of the other as if yourself had always been there already. This is a key part of what Althusser deems the retroactive illusion of ideological interpolation. Now, this is where Slavoj Žižek comes in. Žižek says that Althusser has a good point about ideological interpolation. We recognize ourselves in the missive of the other. And yet, Žižek's correction here is to say that the other is a kind of abyss that we have to fall into. In other words, Žižek radicalizes Althusserian interpolation by arguing that there is no subject before this retroactive illusion. In fact, that the subject itself is the ultimate retroactive illusion. That the central hysterical question, as Freud and Lacan already argued, is what am I to the other? In other words, what object am I to the other? And what subject as object can I therefore realize in myself as a kind of inner necessity? This is what Žižek calls precipitous identification. And precipitous is like when you're walking on the edge of the cliff, except for Žižek, this is the edge of the abyss that you're walking along, that you could fall into. That falling into the gaze of the other, the subjective interpolation of the other, is therefore a constitutive feature for all subjectivity as such. Therefore, for Žižek, it's not simply precipitous identification, it's that all identification is, strictly speaking, precipitous. This is the emergence of the symbolic. You identify yourself as true self in the symbolic order. Now, here actually, I was watching the other day, I was watching classic Italian movie, The Leopard, and we can see a perfect example of ideological interpolation and what it does to the subject. In the movie, we see the transition from Italian monarchy to the beginnings of republicanism. And one of the members of staff who works for one of the aristocratic lords, he complains. He says, "Yesterday, I was a loyal subject to the king. Now I am a mere citizen subject. Who am I loyal to?" And it's the perfect example of ideological interpolation. In the monarchy, the servant identifies as servant. That's his entire identity. However, once he becomes citizen subject, he has to identify by means of something else, except he doesn't know yet what. What is this X? What is this indeterminable X that now defines him as citizen
Should
subject?
play e6.
Well, it is no longer
Really know
that
what
he is
to play.
a loyal servant, but that he is a democratic participant who believes in the tricolore and the flag and the republic, etc. In other words, monarchism has been replaced by nationalism at that exact point. Now, what's important to note here is that, strictly speaking, from Lacanian perspective, all identification exists on this level of I do not know who I am loyal to, I do not know who I am for. That even the idea of being completely independent therefore relies on the kind of intersubjective stance by which you are independent apropos other people. It's similar to the Sartrean idea that hell is others. It's not that being with other people is hell, it's that the very idea of subjectivity, of identification, is already pre-mediated or pre-framed by the idea of your relative relationship to others. In other words, you cannot escape them. Now we can return back to the Lacanian joke. When Lacan says that the existentialist declared the death of God but forgot to tell God, Lacan essentially argues the following. He argues that this X, this unfathomable thing that we have to identify with, this abyss, this what Zizek calls precipitous identification that is constitutive to subjectivity, that this remains even after the death of God. That, in a sense, God is the perfect solution to this problem, because God's absence is precisely his presence. That the declaration of the death of God is therefore not the juxtaposition of the death of God with the presence of God, but precisely to refuse to engage with the problem, which has always been the problems of the immutable presence of the absence of God. In other words, the problem of God is not his absence. The problem of God is his continuous, perpetual, the present of his absence. I should put it like that. Now, this is where Zizek says that we can actually apply this argument to politics as such. When you believe in X, for example, when you believe in America, when you believe in democracy, when you believe in communism, when you believe in some sort of abstract master signifier, you're never believing directly in it. This would be a kind of psychotic stance. If you say, I believe directly in America by myself, the question is, what is America at that point? Instead, for Zizek, all ideological belief is pure intersubjectivity, as he puts it. You are not believing in the thing as such. You are believing on behalf of everybody else who believes as well. In other words, the belief in X, I believe in my country, I believe in my religion, I believe in my family, is always the belief that you are not alone. It is the sustaining of an identity through a symbolic X, abstract, absent, that through its very indeterminability, through its abstraction, through what Lacan calls that it is a signifier that lacks signification, precisely therein you invoke the communal belief of all the others as well. In other words, when you say I believe in X, whether it's I believe in God, or I believe in my country, or I believe in my soccer team, what you're really saying is I believe that other people believe as well, and therefore I understand who I am apropos the symbolic. And Zizek says that precipitous identification is therefore a kind of forestalling of death, that you assert your subjectivity by means of de-subjectivizing on behalf of a collective belief in a higher cause, which invokes therefore the collective resonance with everybody's else belief as well. And here we have once again the constitutive paradox of the subject, which is that the subject realizes his highest necessity precisely by putting himself aside on behalf of this higher X that he would be willing to live and die for. It's like the Chestertonian remark that courage is this paradoxical thing because it combines an absolute willingness to die with an absolute willingness to survival. Therein, in that paradox, lies subjectivity. Now, to conclude, we can relate this to the Lacanian idea of the name of the Father, and when Lacan famously argues that there is no big other. For Lacan, the whole point of the symbolic identification with this unknowable X is precisely that it is not there, that it is empty, that it has to be filled in. Think about it. If you believe directly in something, like let's say that when we say, I believe in America or something, then strictly speaking, this belief has to be abstract. It has to be filled in through our collective belief and our participation in some actions that we find therefore befitting of our collective higher ideal. However, if America were strictly speaking something that had a formal content and you believed in it, it would no longer be belief. It would be simply mere sort of automata-like behavior of worship, of fealty. This is the transition from a feudal society to a democratic society. The transposition of I believe in the monarch as the physical embodiment of the representation of divine will towards I believe in the abstract entity of the collective will of the people as such. Of course, the coming full circle is like the dictator, communist leader who says, I am the embodiment of the will of the people, who has thereby simply closed this gap. Now he is the physical representation of the undefinable will of the people. It's like we've reverted back to monarchy through its negated form. One is almost tempted to say that we have here a negation of the negation. Now, to conclude, when Lacan therefore argues that there is no big other, he's not simply saying that the big other doesn't exist and therefore you shouldn't believe in him. Instead, Lacan is arguing that the very absence, the very emptiness, the very formal indefinability of this X is what lends its power, its strength. That its absence is precisely what means that we become attached to it symbolically. That the symbolic center of power is therefore by necessity always empty. There's a great line in the Ted Lasso, the famous slogan from the Ted Lasso series is, believe. And this is the Lacanian name of the Father in its purest form. It's not I believe in X. It is simply believe, the imperative to believe in the unfathomable X, which is it calls precipitous identification. And so what we have in this empty X is for Lacan the name of the signifier, the name of the Father, namely the signifier without signification. The empty abstract X that we make ourselves subject to in order to access our subjectivity, and therefore to assuage the question, who am I to the other? That is the Lacanian theory of the name of the Father, and why the big other doesn't exist, and why precisely in this non-existence the big other becomes universalized. Now, to conclude, the death of God, therefore, is not only the central aspect of post-metaphysical philosophy. Think about, for example, the Hegelian argument that what dies on the cross is not Christ, but the God of the beyond, the transcendental Father in the sky who pulls the strings of earthly emanations. Herein we find the beginning that then lends itself to the sort of existentialist and Nietzschean and the nihilist attitude about the absence and the death of God. Also the new Hegelians, like the Feuerbachian idea, who in his own way writes about the death of God and the necessity of God for the human mind. However, all of this moves towards the central principle of Zizek's critique of ideology, which is that ideological participation is the invocation not of a God, but of an unfathomable X that substitutes or takes the place of God. Whether it is your country, whether it is your family, whether it is the idea of your sports team, whether it is the idea of your body of work, the thing that you dedicate yourself to. Here we have multiple ways of substituting the idea of God and transposing the notion of God into another form of ideological interpolation. Therefore, the central question of subjectivity is not only who am I, but who am I to the other, and precisely why is it that I require an empty other in order to posit my own existence? Here we can conclude on the Kantian maxim that man is an animal in search of a master, that the paradox of subjectivity is that we require some empty symbolic X to which we dedicate ourselves, by which we realize our own inner necessity and the experience of our own subjectivity.
Yeah, we go here. We're threatening
enjoy your symptom.
every check in the book.
Precisely this ineffable nature of the subject.
Also, Bishop
C5
doesn't work
emerges against the backdrop of his own disappearing. Then the idea
take it.
of the symptom is precisely that you should enjoy it, that you should choose your own master wisely, that you should live your life to the fullest by means of making yourself subject to that which you believe in genuinely on behalf of everybody else, so that you are not alone.
Also, this doesn't work.
That is Zizek's theory of precipitous identification, Lacan's theory of the absence of the big other or the name of the Father. It's also Althusserian interpolation, and finally, the Zizekian, Lacanian, Freudian, Althusserian take on the death of God. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you'd like to download my ebook introduction,
this king's actually stuck. Can't go here.
Only perks and be part of our community. Please go to www.patreon.com/Gentleman and Julie. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.
So I probably hit him with just like 93. This rook is stuck. Right. Yeah, but that pawn will hang. So I think at the end of it, you'll win e4 with check. Maybe g2. So if you went, so if you go here, obviously rook takes doesn't work. I just capture back. I'm fine. But if he goes knight e5, take, check, king take, 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 and I mean you could play bishop take, king take, and then take, and then f2's hanging. You could play f3, but I take on. So yeah. That's what he could try to do, is maybe king e2, bishop a6, king e1. But king e2 I just take here. Should be a final combo here. You trying to find it though. Okay, what if I mean, you could just trade. I think you're winning. Or what if just knight a3? Yeah, trading wins too though, right? takes what they're... Yeah. Trading should just win as well. His king ends up on f4. Or you could just play check and take on e4. Yeah. So take, he pushes. We sack the rook back. Then both pawns are hanging king. Sure, k3. Gotta shoo that guy out of there. Win that pawn. Fuck. Damn, gotta grab my food. Okay, this guy can't resign. Of course, you're just losing here. I mean, really badly. Just completely lost. But anyway, let's look at the opening. Sure, we had b5 here. One blunder. Oh, this is actually losing. Pretty badly, too. I didn't see, That's checkmate. That's checkmate. That's funny. That's great. Like, you just play bishop d7. Plays that. You play rook c8. He literally... Oh. Ooh, didn't see that one. It's a nice little tactic. As far as the opening goes, you know, bishop b2, not a super insane idea there. Yeah. Unfortunate. I AFK'd, dude. Had to.